Hey everybody, welcome back to Blackmagic Craft. Last video, I had a ton of fun revisiting a classic old project and making a new set of 3x3 tiles. In that video, I asked y'all what other classic old BMC video projects should I revisit? Without question, the #1 most requested item were my pillars. After tiles, they're probably the most useful bit of dungeon terrain you can craft. And despite these ones being several years old and me still being pretty much a noob when I made them, they've held up. I think they still look good. They actually look decent even with the new tiles. But we gotta see what would happen if I built the same set of pillars today. In terms of size, I thought the originals were just fine, so I used one of the old ones to set my rip fence on the foam cutter. I'm again using the high density foam that you can get from my foam supplier linked below. But unlike the tiles, I wasn't concerned about which face of the foam I would end up with on the finished layers. This is because it doesn't matter as much on these, where you'll only be seeing the edges, not the faces, on the finished build. I was hoping that this time around the pillars would end up looking nicer, but I was really focused on trying to do them more efficiently. The originals were a great project that anyone could do with nothing more than a knife and some foam core. And if that's all you have on hand, I suggest you go check out that old school video to see how I made these originally. Now, the originals were a great project, but they were incredibly tedious to make. It was a lot of cutting. With big blocks of foam and a hot wire cutter, I could speed this up a lot. Work smarter, not harder. So I ripped some columns that were the finished width that I wanted, but to avoid having to individually cut in each little grout line with a nail file on all the layers like I did the first time around, I found a much better way to do it here. I set my fence spaced about 1/3 of the width of the columns away from the wire. Then I was able to hold the columns upright and tap them into the hot wire to cut in a small groove. Then I just rotated the foam and repeated the cut on all sides. With this method, I did in less than a minute what probably took me an hour or more on the original build. I then sliced the foam down to thin squares. I went with a thickness of about 5mm, although it was just eyeballed. It doesn't really matter as long as you make them all the same. This can be done even more efficiently by running multiple pieces of foam through at the same time. It was great. Making all these layers took no time at all. And just like the dungeon tiles, I threw them in my makeshift foam tumbler to break all the edges. Before I began assembling, I picked a height for the pillars based on number of layers, and I made piles with the correct amount for each so that I could assemble quickly without having to pay attention to layer count. This would avoid the risk of making some too tall by mistake. These were just hot glued together, just like the originals, but I made a clever improvement to ensure they didn't end up tilted or too all over the place. I used the inside 90-degree corner of my rip fence to align the layers of foam. This might not seem like a big deal, but I'm telling you, it helped massively, and I'm feeling pretty damn clever for doing it. I topped each one off with a square of foam that didn't have the grout lines on it and placed them on bases that were just bigger squares of foam that I had also cut earlier. An extremely important aspect of building foam pillars is getting some weight in the bottom so that they don't move and tip over easily. This part should not be skipped under any circumstances. I don't care how you do it, I don't care what you use, but you gotta put some weight in your pillars. Trust me. I went with some heavy metal nuts. I cut out a recess so I could just embed them with hot glue and was good to go. These were looking sharp and were more than sturdy enough, so I moved on to priming them with the same airbrush primer that I used on the tiles. And while I prime them out, let's take a look at this video's sponsor. Into the AM makes awesome clothing, specifically t-shirts, but also things like hats. They even make hoodies, joggers, and shorts. They have a constantly updating line of interesting graphic prints as well as basic tees, which I highly recommend if you want something soft, comfy, and well-fitting that won't shrink in the dryer. The artwork is always super bold and eye-catching, and it's professionally screen printed so the designs hold up with every wash. I mean it, these shirts are very comfy. They're soft, and they fit well. What more do you want? Check out their site and browse the designs. But be sure to use the link in my description to get there, as it will give you an additional 10% discount on your entire order at checkout. Cheers to Into the AM. Thanks for sponsoring this video. Now back to the build. You might be thinking these look pretty plain and could use some embellishment just like the new set of tiles. Well, you're right. I again got out a bunch of plastic bits that would suit the pillars. Some skeletons, some scrolls, weapons, bottles, and torches. The reason I primed first was that I wanted to glue these on with super glue. Using PVA on the tiles was a bit of a pain, and I wanted the instant bond of super glue. The problem is that it can melt foam. Priming before using it was just a safety precaution to ensure I didn't melt big holes in my foam trying to glue crap to them. Of course, those bits all needed to be primed as well, and having to do the priming in 2 steps was a definite trade-off here, but well worth it in my opinion. I painted these much in the same way as I did the dungeon tiles, but this time I used more green on the lower sections just to make them stand out a bit from the tile floor. I dry brushed them with the same fog gray I use on just about everything before moving on to painting all the detail bits as needed. I liked the way they looked as is, but thought they stood out from the tiles a bit too much. So I finished them off with the same sort of super dark brownish black oil wash that I did on the tiles. Once the oil was dried and the flat areas were wiped off, these pillars looked sharp. Like the dungeon tiles, they aren't massively different than the old ones. They're fundamentally the same, just a bit better. I'm really happy with these. The foam work looks just as good as the originals, if not better, but with a lot less effort. And the paint job and extra fun bits really make these a lot cooler looking. Way more exciting and thematic. I got no complaints. This revisiting was another massive success, and I had a great time doing it. I'm really enjoying going back to these classic projects and building them again, and it seems like my viewers are enjoying it as well. If you are, let me know. More importantly, let me know what other classic project you want me to revisit next, because I think I might make this a semi-regular feature on the channel. It's a lot of fun. If you want to pick up some tools or supplies for your own hobby and needs, head over to blackmagicraft.ca. There I have an essential equipment page, and I link to a bunch of the stuff that I use. If you want to support this channel and help me keep making videos, the best way you can do that is by joining the Blackmagicraft Fellowship on Patreon. Don't forget to like, share, comment on this video, all that good stuff. That's it. That's all. I'll see you next time. Cheers.